love cooking and I love teaching people how to cook. I've been doing both for 30 years. To cook well, it helps if you love and value food, as that is where it all starts. My approach to cooking is simple and not new. Use the best ingredients you can, get organised and follow the recipe. That way, you'll be sure to get wonderful results. A salad of leaf greens is a keystone of my cooking and eating. On its own, or as an accompaniment to another dish, it is always present at the lunch or dinner table. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of variations on the leaf salad theme. And the combination of ingredients in this case, hard-boiled eggs, chorizo, harissa and mayonnaise, when combined with the fresh leaves, make a really amazing dish. The first thing I'm going to do for this salad is to make the harissa, which is a really brilliant store-cupboard item. It's a North African sort of spice-filled, quite hot condiment, you might call it. So we start off with some chilies, red chilies in this case, and we're going to roast them. We want to roast them until the skin blisters. So on a tray, no oil, no salt and pepper at this stage, and just straight into the oven to roast. And when they come out of the oven, while they're still hot, straight into a bowl. Then cover the bowl tightly with cling film. And then a head of steam builds up in here. And the steam helps to lift off the skins, so it makes it easier then to peel them. I have, as you can see, allowed these to cool down completely. And then they are relatively easy to peel. Now, it depends on the particular chili, but you just keep sort of pulling the skin down like that, and it just pops out. And then I just cut off the little stalk off the top, and then slit them open. Now, if you want this to be bombastically hot, leave the seeds in. Interestingly, by the way, with chilies, the seeds aren't really the bit that's the hottest, in actual fact. The bit of the chili that's the hottest are these threads here that the seeds are attached to. That's really where the intense heat. But because the seeds are in such close proximity to that thread, that's why they have the reputation of being the hottest. Okay, then we're going to pop these into a food processor. I've got the rest of my ingredients here. Some crushed garlic, quite a bit of crushed garlic. That's actually 8 cloves, but the chilies have enough flavour to temper it and to balance it. And then some spices, the sweet flavour of ground and roasted cumin and ground and roasted coriander. So it's a really, really lovely palette of flavours. Some tomato paste or tomato puree. That's going to add a little bit of sweetness as well. The other herb I'm going to add is a little freshly chopped coriander, just for freshness. I don't need to chop this too finely because the machine is going to do some of the work for me. So a pinch of salt, like that. Set your blender at a low speed and drizzle in a generous measure of olive oil. You want to add enough to bind your ingredients, but not so much that they're swimming in oil. Okay, that's looking good now. Okay, lovely. Little taste. Careful now, this is fairly fiery stuff. Holy moly. It's absolutely delicious. It's quite spicy. I may start to cry any moment. I'm going to put a tiny pinch of sugar, just for that final little lift. It's delicious. I'm suddenly in a much hotter part of the world. Right, great, that looks perfect. So that's the consistency I was trying to achieve, that sort of soft, not quite a flowing consistency, but on the other hand, you can see the way that's going to spread. I'm really delighted with that. Jam-packed full of flavour. So I'm going to put that into a bowl. So it doesn't make a huge quantity, but it's so intense in flavour that you only ever really use very little of this. The next thing I need to do is get my eggs on cooking. Add a good pinch of salt to the boiling water. This actually seasons the egg while it cooks because the eggshell is porous. I want hard-boiled eggs, so I'm going to cook them for 10 minutes. Okay, the other thing I can do is get my chorizo on cooking. So just sliced chorizo and a little bit of olive oil. So really what I'm trying to do here is to draw flavour out of the chorizo and into the oil. These will cook just for 3 or 4 minutes. I'm not going to serve them hot, particularly on the salad. You could if you wanted to, but it's really the sort of the spicy flavour of the oil that I'm after, and the colour of the oil, and the slightly different texture that I've given to the chorizo. First, separate your eggs, and I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have clean bowls and to avoid getting even small amounts of yolk in with the whites. You don't need the whites for the mayonnaise, but keep them for meringues. They freeze perfectly. Add a pinch of salt to the yolks and a generous grind of black pepper. A small teaspoon of mustard isn't essential, but I think it rounds off the flavour. Add 2 teaspoons of white wine vinegar and whisk all of these ingredients together. So far, so straightforward. And the next stage is straightforward too. But it's the part of the technique that most people think is difficult. Honestly, it isn't. Just drizzle the olive oil on slowly in a steady dribble, rather than pouring it in too quickly. It requires a bit of coordination and patience, but really, it's just 5 minutes. And in that time, you're creating one of the world's really great sauces. It bears no resemblance to anything you'll buy in a jar. Prove this to yourself by tasting it, and pat yourself on the back for having disproved the myth that mayonnaise is difficult to make. With my mayonnaise ready, I can now assemble my salads. For most salads, certainly savoury salads, you're going to need lots of lovely leaves. And then this will form the sort of the balance for the dish. So, we've got the hard-boiled eggs, which we cooked for 10 minutes. Look at that, how beautiful are those? So I'm just going to pop them in sort of fairly randomly. Okay, a little blob of mayonnaise first. Now for the harissa. This is spicy stuff, so go easy here. Your family, your friends, whatever, can always ask for a little bit more. There's almost always going to be one chili fiend at any table, but let's not have the entire group rendered speechless. Now this doesn't really start to look nice until you put the very last thing. It's one of those funny sort of salads. You're looking at it at this stage and thinking, oh God, I'm not so sure about that. But when you put on the chorizo and the final little drizzle of our oil, see the way that oil has now taken on a lovely sort of saffron, sort of rust colour like that, really lovely. So the final little addition are a few little coriander leaves. And that's it. Straight to the table with that. A little bit of brown soda bread, butter to go with it, or some little new boiled potatoes will be fantastic. Lunch, supper, easy, lovely, nutritious, delicious food. Perfectly grilled steak with a mustard and herb butter, a lamb chop with a roast garlic mayonnaise, another use for our homemade mayonnaise, a golden fillet of fish with lemon and herb salsa, a juicy hamburger with roast mushrooms. What all of these have in common is the technique of pan grilling or pan frying. The main differences in the results from the two cooking pans are appearance and texture. The grill pan with its raised edges will give richly coloured lines on the ingredients being cooked. So the resulting colour tends to be two-tone and a slightly crispier finish, whereas the frying pan gives a more even and single colour result, with not as much texture. The grill pan also produces a slightly deeper flavour. The following dish demonstrates this crucial technique. I'm going to start with the apple and plum sauce, which we're going to serve with our burgers and our chops. Peel your apple, cut it into quarters, and then core it. And it's interesting when you're cooking with a cooking apple, so a bitter cooking apple like a Bramley, that if the smaller you cut the apple, the longer it takes to cook. I know that sounds completely ridiculous and a complete contradiction, but it's a fact. So cutting up the apples like that, sort of chunky sized pieces, and then the plums, I'm just going to quarter. So run your knife around them like that, and then run my knife around again in the opposite direction. And then usually they're reasonably good humoured like that, and they break up. Okay, the apples and the plums, I'm putting in 2 tablespoons of sugar in there, like that, and then a little water. And the purpose of the water is just to stop the sauce from burning. So you look into the saucepan and you see virtually no water in the bottom of the pan. Then we're going to put that on a low heat, and the apples will just break down to a foam, and the plums will break down to a foam. Now our pork. So we've got the lovely pork flesh. This is beautiful Irish quality assured pork. A nice amount of pork fat. That's for me about the perfect amount. But I'm going to cut off the rind or the skin. Just cut along the rind. then what I like to do is to cut that rind into long, thin strips. 3 or 4 from each pork chop, depending. So they're going onto my pan. They're going to throw out some of their fat, and that fat is going to be a vehicle for cooking the pork in. Okay, that's those. We'll keep a little eye on those. They're cooking away, and after the break, I'll show you how to make some delicious pork burgers. I'm also going to prepare a terrific turnip puree. Believe me, it's much better than it sounds. Then we'll round everything off with some shortbread biscuits and a raspberry fool. Before the break, we left the apples and plums on a gentle simmer. We trimmed the pork chops and we put some crackling on to crisp up. So while various things stew and crackle, let's get on with our pork burgers. So I've got beautiful pork mince here, and you'll note, like any mince should be, it's flecked with little bits of fat. So you're going to get a lovely juicy texture. To get a good burger of any description, you need a small amount of fat. So what I'm going to add to this are some chili. So I've got some chopped chili. I've got some lovely pistachio nuts, which are really delicious with the pork, and they give a lovely crunchy texture. I've got some crushed garlic, and pork just absolutely loves garlic. And then the spice I'm going to use here is fennel seeds. But with the fennel seeds, which is a classic flavor combination with pork, I want to just roast them a little bit before I add them into the mixture. It's amazing. I mean, you associate fennel seeds with Mediterranean cooking, Indian cooking, Italian cooking. It's used in all of the great cuisines all over the world. And one of the reasons for that is because it just grows everywhere. Okay, into my pestle and mortar. You could use a spice grinder, but this, honestly, is as convenient as anything. Okay, lovely. Now that's looking lovely. You see, it doesn't take so long. Now, let's see what we've got. So I've got some of the slightly coarser fennel seed there, and then some of it is completely ground down to a powder. So in other words, there are little bits, chunky little bits of fennel, and they will be delicious when they're cooked in the burger. So I'm just going to pop the fennel into the bowl, and then we are ready to mix. So a nice pinch of salt, pepper, and a little fresh coriander leaf, just to freshen everything up. So all these flavors just absolutely love each other. Already the colors actually that are starting to appear in the bowl are lovely. And good mix. I'm not going to use any egg to bind this because the fat in the pork will help to bind everything together. Now, what I need to do before I form my burgers is just to fry off a tiny little bit of the mixture to make sure the seasoning is perfect. So make a tiniest little burger. In fact, it can need only be a few crumbs. We're going to fry that for a couple of minutes, so we'll be able to taste that and see if it needs another pinch of salt, another pinch of pepper. It probably won't need any more chili. It won't need any more fennel seeds, and there's lots of coriander in there. Let me see. Needs salt. That's why it's so worthwhile to do what I just did. You'd be ashamed to have formed them, cooked them, and brought them to the table and think, blast, it needed another pinch of salt. I prefer personally to have 2 slightly smaller burgers, and I think better not too thick. If they're too thick, it takes them too long to cook through, and they get too crusty on the outside, and you may have a slight fear of them not being properly cooked through. The less scrappy the edges are, the easier they are to cook, and the less likely they are to break. So I'd be very happy to have those made up hours ahead of time back into the fridge for cooking later on. Here you can see these wonderful ridges so unique to the grill pan, which lends such a beautiful texture and flavour to your meat. The apple and plum sauce has been cooking away on the gentle heat. It's that beautiful moment when the apple and the plum has broken down to puree. I love when it gets to that stage. You can see the way the plum has absolutely stained the apple, and you can almost tell, even without tasting it, that those two flavours are going to work together really well. Give it a quick mix to thoroughly blend the two ingredients together. Keep it simmering away, and before long, voila! You have a delicious ruby red sauce, which will make a delectable accompaniment to our burgers and chops. The turnip is a much maligned vegetable, but when simply cooked, it can become something unexpectedly gratifying. Place some cooked diced turnip into a food processor, season with a generous helping of salt and pepper, and then blitz. What you want here is a dropping consistency, just like this. Pour onto a serving plate and smooth it out for a better presentation. And if you want to take this to another level, take some Parmesan cheese and grate the Parmesan cheese over the turnip. Then a drizzle of your best extra virgin olive oil. And it's a way of making the humble turnip into something as special as any vegetable in the vegetable kingdom. Now, our pork, finally. So I'm now confident that these are cooked. So the crackling on fennel coriander. This is a real celebration of Irish pork and a meal that I'd be happy to sit down to anywhere and with anybody. Final dish in any balanced meal needs to complement whatever has gone before it, and a raspberry fool would work perfectly with the salad and the pork. The aim with a fruit fool is to achieve a balance of fruit and cream that favours both equally and allows neither element to dominate. To serve alongside the raspberry fool, I'm going to show you a simple but brilliant recipe for biscuits, a recipe I keep returning to all of the time. 3 simple ingredients: flour, butter, good Irish butter, and caster sugar. So pop in the butter. Sometimes I might scrape a few vanilla seeds in here. I'm not going to today. Or I might put a little pinch of mixed spice if you want to ring the changes. And this is a shortbread biscuit, so there's no liquid in here. So we start off by rubbing the butter into the flour. My butter's at room temperature, so it rubs in nice and easily. Now, the butter is starting to break down like that, so I can add in my caster sugar. Now, at this point, you might lose your nerve and think that that's never going to come together without liquid. It is. It will. You just have to sort of believe it and keep at it. So keep going. And gradually, it goes from looking like sand to grit to pebbles, and then with your intervention, it just starts to come together into larger pieces like that. Bring it into a little slab, ball, whatever you want to call it, like that. So you see where suddenly, miraculously, no liquid, it just comes together. And just give it a little gentle knead. All I'm trying to do is to make sure everything comes together. And you see the sort of the texture of that. And if I cut that in half, it's like that. So I'm ready to roll this. Generally speaking, with a biscuit mixture that size, I'll roll half it at a time. I just find it easier to control it. So a little flour on my work surface, not too much, doesn't need to be a snow scene. A little flour on top, like that. Okay, and then when I'm rolling a biscuit, or pastry for that matter, particularly a short crust pastry, what I do is I roll to the edge, but don't roll over the edge, because if you roll out over the edge like that, it gets thinner and more difficult to handle at that particular point. And then I keep moving it so as it doesn't get a chance to glue itself to the pastry counter. So you see the way it's pretty good humoured, really, like that. Then, baking sheet, and then your cutters of choice. Whatever you want to do. You don't have to have a cutter. You can cut them freehand if you want. So I'll do a little of both. Sometimes they lift off the tray like that. The ones that don't lift up with the cutter, use a little palette knife or an egg slice or something like that. And you see the way I've left a little bit of space between them because they expand very slightly. Now, into the oven, and we're going to cook them until they're golden brown. Ah, perfect. So these have now just taken on a lovely golden colour, and they get a little darker, as you'd imagine, at the edges. Now, it's essential to get these off the tray immediately. So again, palette knife, egg slice, something like that. So just sort of golden brown. You can see them almost, look, can you see them colouring? Just as they're sitting on the tray there for moments. Brilliant, okay. Just sit that tray up there, because they'll just cool safely. And I'm going to go ahead and make the fool. And what I have here actually are frozen raspberries. You can make this with fresh raspberries, but I actually think, interestingly, that this particular fool recipe is better made with frozen raspberries. I've just sprinkled my raspberries with a generous helping of caster sugar. I'm going to just scrape these in here, and then we're going to puree. You need to be a little bit careful when you're making this that you don't do a sort of a Jackson Pollock type effect all over your work surface. Okay, I think that's pretty much that. It looks like a sort of a thick raspberry sauce at this stage with the seeds still in. I'm going to sieve this through a nylon or stainless steel sieve. Avoid using an aluminium sieve because sometimes the acid in the fruit will react with the aluminium. So pass it through the sieve and keep pushing until you get every last bit of the liquids. And interesting, whenever you're sieving fruit, the best bit, the most flavoursome bit, is the bit that comes through the sieve last. So keep at it. What I want to end up with in here in the sieve is pretty much just the seeds. Okay, so scrape the seeds, and then, very importantly, scrape the thick puree. See the way that's lovely and thick? Everything off there, that's all our flavour, that's the intensity. And very simply, all we have to do to this now is add a little bit of whipped cream. Give the cream a thorough whipping. You'll know it's ready when it holds stiff peaks. This is now ready to add to the puree. Now, you can fold it through completely if you want to, or you can leave it so that it has a swirly effect. So that's lovely. So right down to the bottom to get the liquidy raspberry sauce up through the cream. That's it, basically. Right, don't overfill. Maybe a fraction more, like that. Start to see the lovely sort of streaked effect like that, which is cute. Then perch your biscuits on top if you wish. I like to put the tiniest little sprinkle of sugar onto the biscuits just for a little bit of sparkle, like that. And then if you wanted to, a little mint leaf. So that's it. Straight to the table with that. Simple, easy, 3 ingredients. Lovely.